Back in 2010, Ubisoft was tasked with developing a tie-in video game for the then upcoming Scott Pilgrim movie. Now, usually tie-in video games are pretty so-so, to put it nicely, but every once in a while you'll get a real gem. A game that you know the developers poured some real heart and soul into. And this game was one of them. Since then, these guys have gone on to form their own studio and have actually been creating some of the best beat-em-ups ever since. Those games are for another time though, because today we're here to discuss Scott Pilgrim. I was absolutely obsessed with the original game ever since I first picked it up, and I remember when the idea of a re-release, let alone another game, seemed next to impossible. Yet, nearly 16 years later, they've done it again. So, join me as we spend another winter, or in this case, one more summer, running down the sprawling streets of Toronto, Canada. While the original Scott Pilgrim game was a basic recap of the 2010 movie, which in and of itself was a basic recap of the comics, Scott Pilgrim EX shakes things up a little bit and tells its own original story. Brian Lee O'Malley, the creator of the series, has actually stated that this game takes place after all of the previous installments of the franchise, and this means that it's the perfect starting point for new fans who may want to get into the series. Although, I'd still recommend checking out some of the past entries in the franchise if you're interested at all, as the game is scattered with references from the comics, the movie, and the animated series that came before it. In the end, it makes the experience all the more enjoyable. The plot of the game is simple. A mysterious robot known as Metal Scott, a robotic version of the titular hero and a homage to a certain metallic hedgehog, has appeared out of nowhere and stolen Scott's bandmates for reasons unexplained to you at the time. To make matters more dire, tons of strange green portals have been appearing all throughout the city, effectively stitching together worlds and bringing 3 different enemy factions with them. Now, as one of the 7 playable characters, you'll have to battle your way through this mysterious patchwork land and rescue your friends, uncovering the mystery behind these strange rifts in the process. And now that I think about it, nothing about this is simple at all. Anyway, that's the general story of the game. As for the gameplay, it's really fun. If you know Tribute games, you know that they've put out some killer beat-em-ups over the past few years, and this one is no exception. EX shares a decent amount of its DNA with the original 2010 game, with somewhat similar movesets, upgradable stats, and punchy combat that brings satisfying blows with each attack you land. The game also brings in some additions of its own, shaking things up from its predecessor to bring a new, unique experience to the table. The best way I could describe this new experience would be as an RPG-adjacent beat-em-up game. This time around, the game follows a quest system, and instead of having separate levels connected by an overworld like your typical beat-em-up game, this game takes place on one big interconnected map. Throughout the game, you'll be running through and revisiting every area from time to time in order to complete each quest. And I think this is a really refreshing take on a genre that can honestly get a little samey sometimes. I mentioned that upgradable stats also return from the previous game, and this time around, those aren't the only buffs you'll have. In addition to being able to upgrade your vitality, willpower, strength, and agility through consumables again, EX also allows you to equip accessories and badges, and you'll have 4 and 2 slots respectively. Accessories act like your typical armor in RPGs, giving you additional boosts to your base stats. You'll definitely want to pick up a few of these throughout your playthrough, because they can come in handy real quick. Badges, on the other hand, alter the gameplay in some way, such as increasing the value of dropped coins, restoring your HP with each finishing blow you land, or reducing how much GP a special attack uses up. Like accessories, these can be extremely useful, and have a wide variety of uses depending on what you're doing in-game at any given moment. This means that you may find yourself switching them out from time to time throughout the game. As for the actual combat of the game, it's just as snappy and satisfying as ever, with each attack feeling like it has some real weight behind it. As usual, you've got your basic fast and strong attacks, your grabs, and your supers. And there are also some combos thrown in there as well, which feel really satisfying to land. Unlike the original game, where you had to unlock every move as you play, which could honestly feel like a slog sometimes, especially for returning players starting a new save file, EX actually has every attack unlocked from the start, letting you go all out from the very beginning. However, you'll still be bottlenecked by the level of your stats, so you won't be able to run around mindlessly tanking through enemy attacks just yet. So, in typical RPG fashion, you'll definitely want to take some time to fight the enemies in your path instead of running away from them if you want to stand a chance against any of the bosses in the game. Now, moving on from the gameplay, I want to take a minute to talk about the art direction of the game, which is something I don't typically mention in any of my reviews. After all, it's not the graphics, but rather the gameplay that makes a game great. That being said, I want to make an exception here because I love everything about the art direction of this game. Once again, Paul Robertson was brought on board for the sprite work of this game, and if you know anything about his art style, you know that it always goes above and beyond. The style of this game follows a similar design language from the Netflix show, which was pretty faithful to the art style of the comics themselves, so I'd say the artists knocked it out of the park with this one. The animations are also extremely fluid, which helps play a hand in the satisfying punchy combat that I mentioned before. Plus, we get some really great smear frames out of some of these. I mean, just look at this screen grab I got. While we're on the topic of art direction, I want to take a minute to talk about the music of this game as well. Anamanaguchi has been brought back on board again for the soundtrack of this game, and if you know anything about them, you know that they make some pretty killer chiptune tracks. The soundtrack to the original Scott Pilgrim game filled many hours of my early teen days, and hearing EX's soundtrack for the first time brought me right back to those times. It was sort of like my Ratatouille moment. You know what I'm talking about. Each song fits so well into whatever scene it's playing over, whether it's a cutscene, a boss battle, or even just an overworld track. The band really brought the energy with this OST, and a lot of the tracks get you real hyped to start punching out some robots, monsters, and vegans while you jog up and down the streets of Toronto. It was also pretty nice hearing them branch out a bit with this soundtrack, as it really gives each song its own standout flavor. That's enough gushing about the game's soundtrack, though. After all, this isn't an album review. We're talking about the game itself, so let's get back on track here. The length of Scott Pilgrim EX is mainly going to depend on your skill level and what difficulty you're playing on. But with the slight RPG elements that this game has, it'll probably take you a little longer than your standard beat-em-up game. For example, playing on the hardest difficulty, it took me just under 4 hours total to beat the game on my first go. And since you've got stats that you'll want to level up, you may find yourself grinding out some gold from time to time, which may take up a decent chunk of your game time. With how punchy and satisfying the game's combat is though, and with a killer soundtrack playing in the background, it never feels boring or repetitive. The main story of the game consists of 12 quests to complete, but that's not all. With various challenges and events scattered throughout the map, and 30 achievements if you tend to hunt for those, there's still a lot to do in this game once your first playthrough wraps up. Not to mention that you've got 7 different playable characters, each with their own endings. This effectively extends the game sevenfold, and estimating each playthrough will take you at least 2 hours. That brings the total up to around 14 hours, not accounting for the extra time it would take to go for every achievement. With all that this game has to offer, I personally think that the $30 price tag is pretty justified. Although, if you're on the fence, it couldn't hurt to wait for a sale for $20 or so either. Overall, as a fan of the original Scott Pilgrim franchise, the original 2010 game, and the beat-em-up genre in general, I think it's safe to say that this game actually exceeded all of the expectations that I had for it. From the fast, quick, punchy gameplay, the beautiful pixel art, some pretty funny writing, and yet another banger of a soundtrack from Anamanaguchi, everything weaves together so nicely to make for one of the best, most satisfying experiences for both fans of the beat-em-up genre and the Scott Pilgrim franchise alike. All in all, I would absolutely recommend this game to anyone who may be even remotely interested in checking it out.